Sales Rep Radio.
Hi, everybody. This is Dan Walker, and this is Sales Rep Radio, a presentation of timeless sales tips and best practices from some of the world's most talented sales consultants. It's news from your world, and it starts right now.
Hot tips, Sales Rep Radio.
We all know that you need talent, real talent, and experience to make it through the sales cycle. But for a lot of sales reps, even seasoned veterans, the most stressful part of the process is the close. After all, what was it all for if you don't get ink? Good news. Closing successfully can be one of the most comfortable, low-pressure pieces of the puzzle. Here to explain is speaker, sales consultant, and author of The Perfect Close, James Muir. James, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm a big fan of the show.
Thanks. James, why do sales reps get heart palpitations when they round the corner to the close?
Well, if you boil it right down, there's really just two reasons for it. It's either skill or will. And when we say skill, that is the rep doesn't know what to ask, right? They don't know how to ask, or they really don't have the will to ask, or they're not comfortable asking. And between those two, statistically, the will problem is a much bigger problem of the two. It's the reason they don't ask. And that's because 99% of the closing techniques out there are actually manipulative. And because the rep doesn't feel comfortable using them, they just end up not asking for anything at all.
Describe what you mean when you say manipulative.
Well, they're contrived to elicit a certain answer, like an alternative choice close. You know, do you want 500 or 600? Well, the answer is loaded, right? You're buying either way. I have literally every book on closing you could imagine, and some of them have hundreds in there. And essentially, when you boil them all down, they're just trying to force the customer into a yes answer. And a lot of people just don't feel congruent with that. In fact, when you sit back and think about it, what makes a customer feel manipulated is when we're trying to move the process faster than they're ready for. When we move it faster than they're ready for, it starts looking self-serving to the customer, and so they'll pull back. And trying to push them faster than they're ready for actually causes the selling process to become dysfunctional because they start to withhold information.
You're right. That's an uncomfortable situation for everybody. So point us in the right direction.
The short answer is you just need to ask in a way that's comfortable for sales reps and that's zero pressure and non-manipulative for the customer. Like I said, when we try to move the sale faster than they're ready for, that's when it starts to feel manipulative. So I think just not a lot of energy has gone into thinking, well, how can this be done? How can you ask in a way that's no pressure and non-manipulative? And I might add very effective, right, where you get a positive answer most of the time, and that's really what the perfect close is.
Sounds like the perfect conclusion, James. So help us out. How should we be asking for the sale?
Okay, well, before you go into any interaction, it's important to have a few outcomes in mind, right? We should have an ideal advance, that is the best possible outcome, and then a couple of alternatives just in case your ideal advance turns out to be unrealistic for some reason. With that said, the perfect close is just two questions, it's no pressure, and it's 95% effective. There's 5 different variations of that, and the basic one is this. When it comes time, at the appropriate time, we're just going to ask question number 1, which is, does it make sense to X? And X is your ideal advance. So maybe an example of that would be, does it make sense for us to schedule an assessment to see what our best options are? So in that example, the assessment is the ideal advance. And there's really only 2 answers that customers can give you with this. It's either yes or no. And if the answer is yes, great, we're off to the races. We're going to schedule that assessment. On the flip side, if they hesitate, or if the answer is no, then we're going to ask question 2. And the basic version of that is, okay, well, what do you think is a good next step? And after having observed thousands of sales calls, I can tell you that what happens in 90% of cases is that the customer ends up suggesting a very logical next step for where they're at in their buyer's journey. So that's the basic version is, does it make sense to X? And what's a good next step then? And beyond that, we can use the other possible advances that we plan for to make it even more effective. These two are called the fallback and the add-on. And in the fallback, instead of saying what's a good next step, we're actually going to suggest one instead. And we might say something like, so other clients at this stage typically do Y. Does it make sense for us to do Y? And then Y would be, of course, one of your alternates. And then the add-on, it works the same way, except we're adding on instead of taking away. And so in that case, once we ask them, does it make sense to X? And they say, sure. And then we go, okay, well, other clients at this stage sometimes also do this other thing. Does it make sense for us to do that too? And we can actually keep doing it more than once. I wouldn't recommend falling back more than twice, or it kind of comes off as being self-serving. But in terms of the add-on, there doesn't seem to be any limit to the number of add-ons that you can do. If the customer's ready for it, then you can just keep adding on, and you're moving the whole thing at the pace that they're ready for. And that's really the key here, is we just want to move at a pace that's ready for the customer.
Well, the way you just stepped through this felt very comfortable, James. Nice, easy pace, no pressure.
No, you nailed it. The takeaway here is that the approach paces the sale at exactly the rate the customer is ready for, and it leaves both you and the customer on emotionally higher ground than, will you buy my stuff, right? A closed-ended question that's an ultimatum, essentially. And the reason for that is when you get right down to it, the perfect close really isn't a closing question. It's actually a timing question, right? We're really just asking them if the timing is right to do something. And that ends up making the customer feel like they're much more in control. And it makes you look like just a facilitator and a consultant. You're just trying to help walk them through all the decision-making process to get them to where they want to go.
And it's all done through a series of well-planned questions.
And simple questions. The key there is just planning a little bit ahead of time what the outcomes are you're hoping for the meeting. Plan an ideal advance, then a couple alternatives. And then we won't know until we get into it, but we're going to ask, does it make sense to whatever your ideal one is? And if they say yes, great. Then we can suggest maybe one of the other two. If they say no or they hesitate, then we're going to say, okay, well, what do you think is a good next step then? And what will happen is you just end up creating momentum. In a typical B2B sale, there's a lot of smaller steps before we get to that final one where we get the contract. And this just keeps the ball rolling. We're slowly advancing the sale every time we're with the customer, moving at their pace. And that ultimately gets us to that final ask where we win the sale. So that's why we say it's 95% effective, because it's either going to produce an actual close or an advance every time we meet with the customer.
Well, how about your favorite example of how the perfect close played out?
Sure. Well, I'm in the healthcare space, and I was working with a group in Sierra Vista, Arizona, and we were demonstrating our solution to a IT executive who we felt was important, but not the right group of people. So our ideal advance in that example was to actually demo to the right people. That was our goal, was, okay, we'll show these guys, and then we'll ask them if we can show the other guys. So we get in there and we do our thing, and then we ask him, does it make sense for us to show this to the other team? And he says, yes, absolutely. I was thinking the same thing. So we're like, okay, great, check. So I look at my list. What's the next one on the list? And the next one on the list is for us to get conversion data. So I said, well, sometimes it makes sense. Other groups at this stage will want us to look at their conversion data to make sure we can convert it all and find out what we can get. Does it make sense for us to get a copy of your conversion data? And he goes, great idea. Absolutely. So boom, we got number 2. And the last one on my list was just to get our technical teams talking to see if we can use all their equipment, right? And so I said, well, other groups at this stage will sometimes have our technical teams talk to each other to make sure we can use the gear that you have. Does it make sense for us to schedule a time for our technical teams to get together? And he goes, yeah, absolutely, great idea. And I'm like, wow, 3 for 3. So I'm out of gas. So each of these has a special thing that you ask at the end to keep it going or fix it. And in the add-on example, what you ask is, are there any other logical steps we should be thinking about right now? That's the last thing you say. And so in this case, that's why I said, all right, well, I'm 3 for 3. Is there anything else we should be thinking about doing? And he says, well, our legal people are kind of slow. Could we get a copy of your agreement? And I'm like, are you kidding me? I never would have dreamed I could have asked him to take a look at our contract going into this meeting, because I thought I was demoing the wrong people. And I might even argue that if I had asked at the very beginning, it would have gone over like a lead balloon. But this really shows very well how we're just pacing it at the rate that they're ready for. And so in this case, we got all 3 of our advances, including one that we didn't even anticipate, which was for them to get a copy of our contract so they could review it.
Almost too easy. Great story, James. Asking this series of low-pressure questions landed the business.
It is actually always like that. And so I think when salespeople lean into the sale a little bit, they start to telegraph that they're doing it for themselves and not for the customer. And what's nice about the perfect close is we're actually just trying to help them. Selling is serving, right? The customer's trying to achieve a goal, and we're trying to facilitate them getting to that. If they could get there without you, they wouldn't call you. They would already be there. And so the fact that we're there, we're just helping them get from one point to the other point in a logical and, like I said, a zero pressure sort of way. So it does feel like you're just together in an environment where you're collaborating.
Did you just give the whole book away?
No, the truth is, we just did cover very much of what's in the perfect close. And actually, I'm very open about that. If they want to go to my website and just download the model, they can actually, for free, download all 5 models. It shows exactly how to do it. So most of the rest of the book describes a little bit of the science behind why it works, and then all the prep work of what to do to get to that point where you can ask the perfect close question. how do we make it more effective? Now that you know how to do it, how do I make it as effective as it can be? And that's what's the rest of what's in the book. But essentially, we covered a lot of what's in Chapter 12, which is where the secret is.
And a lot more to know on the subject than we have time for here. James, where do you want us to go to learn more and access some of these resources?
Probably the best place is to go to my website, which is puremuir.com, PUREMUIR.com. There you'll be able to get a ton of free resources, including a special report, 7 Deadly Myths of Closing. There's some free chapters of the book there, planning forums, sample agendas, a lot more. Of course, I'm very active on LinkedIn and Twitter, so those are also great ways to connect with me.
James Muir at puremuir.com. Thanks for helping us out.
Thanks for having me on, Dan. I'm a huge fan.
And that's going to do it, folks. Sales Rep Radio is a production of the Marcom Store, your source for audio and video training and communications, comprehensive e-learning, training reinforcement, and, of course, custom podcasts just like this one. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share this podcast. This is Dan Walker. Thanks for listening in. We'll see you again next time for another edition of Sales Rep Radio.